Good afternoon. This is Media Center Ukraine, Odesa. We are starting our working day with the briefing about Odesa myth in the Russian-Ukrainian War of 2022. This report has been drafted by the Ukrainian Future Institute, and we are having with us Vadym Denysenko, Executive Director of the Institute. The floor is yours. Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation. Since the 24th of February 2022, the Ukrainian Future Institute has turned in many aspects into the institute studying Russia. And over the period, we've tried to study all the processes in Russia, in their allies, with their economy, society. So all aspects of Russia's life, because if you need to know your enemy if you want to win. I would like to say that at the moment in Ukraine there is no institute studying Russia. Unfortunately, only NGO, the Ukrainian Institute of Future, is the only organization to study Russia. And today I would like to share the results of our work over the last year. 3 or 4 times a week, we provide analytical reports about the current situation in the Russia-Ukraine war, including the information about about the Russian Federation. For example, we are going to report about the Russian Prosperity Fund. But now I would like to share the report Odesa myth in the Russian-Ukrainian war. So let's start from Russia's biggest concerns. So, despite the fact that many believe that the leadership of the country is very powerful, that there is 100% consent of the whole population, but if we look at the situation in Russia, is that there is no confidence in tomorrow. So, Russians, they don't have the image of their future, and that started in June of 2022. 1/3 of Russians since that moment have had no bigger picture of their future. The second concern, anxiety about their well-being. There are 2 major topics for Russians now, which is quite interesting, is that now women are mainly hired, and the possible conscripts males from 18 to 55 do not have opportunity to be hired, and so there are also cuts in award payments at work. And of course, the third concern is mobilization fear, the fear that has been gradually growing. And they are afraid of the second wave of mobilization. Perhaps this is the biggest concern that they have at the moment. Many believe that we should study political ratings of Putin, and every month we see the same numbers, and we believe that this is our main problem. But Putin's rating does not influence the future of the country. We should study the direction of its development. The number of 65–67% is not changing the number that shows the amount of people who are sure that the Russian Federation moves in the right direction. And we know that as soon as this number starts to increase, the situation will start changing. What is the right direction of development for a Russian? So we need to understand this to impact the people who believe that the direction is wrong. First is that there is the myth of import substitution. Most Russians believe that the economy will still develop because of the import substitution as a result of the sanctions. Paradoxically, despite the 1990s, they've managed to ensure smooth production of the basic products. And Russians don't see any problems in the shops. They see products there. That's why they believe that import substitution is successful. But they have already been falling behind the whole world when it comes to innovations and technical developments. The second point is here security. They believe that the war has improved security. They believe that the environment in Russia has become more secure. But actually, we hope that in the nearest half a year, this attitude will be different. They now talk about traditional values, about anti-corruption activities, etc. So they believe that everything's right, but changes are quite slow. And it is very difficult to change their opinion because they say that power manages to rectify its errors. And this is due to the fact that the mentality of Russians is quite archaic. And there is the dual thinking. This means that Russian can have two opposite answers to the same questions. For example, the question, do you support the continuation of the special operations? And they have 60% say that they support this. The next question, do you want to stop, will you support the leadership of the country if they stop this operation? And again, 60% support this. So this double thinking allows them to have two contrary answers to the same question. The wrong direction of development. They say that it is wrong to mobilize all people. They are very afraid of this, and they can think that this is the main threat. Then corruption, but actually they already feel the results of the corruption. Increased prices, refugees issues, saboteurs, etc. But generally, the biggest fear of Russians is the second wave of mobilization and the martial law. How do they explain that everything is fine, that everything is right? So they say that the situation has not deteriorated, and actually this is the basis for the whole propaganda of the Russian Federation. So they explain to their society that this is not important for the situation to become better. It is important that the situation hasn't got worse. And they compare the situation with the 90s, and most Russians say now that the situation is not that bad as it was in the 90s. And this narrative of the 90s is very important for them, even for those people who was born after the 90s. And they don't understand, unfortunately, that the situation will be in the future like it was in the 90s. And they also say that there are shortcomings, but they are corrected by the leadership. It is very difficult to break down such mentality, but we believe that their mentality will change, also very slow. As for the economic situation in the Russian Federation, 2023 will be much more difficult than 2022, because during the most of the 2022, the prices for energy carriers were very high, and that was the period of adjustment, of economic adjustments. But still, they have significant foreign currency inflows. The adjustment will continue, but without these financial inflows. We can see the budget deficit growing, and of course, we're happy about the number of their deficit in January, but was around 1/3 of the reserve of the National Welfare Fund, and the deficit now is 1.9 trillion. And of course, we cannot calculate mathematically and say that in 3 months this fund will decrease. Of course, they will start printing money, they will increase money emission, and they will bring ruble down to around 80, 90 rubles per $1. But this anyway will have a significant impact on a common Russian. There will be the decrease in government orders in all regions of the Russian Federation except for Moscow. And of course, this will affect the employment of the population. Because now we can see the significant growth in temporary employment when people work only 2-3 days a week instead of working the whole week. Lack of new technological solutions will become a problem. In most regions, Russians will experience significant problems with the refrigerator in June, July 2023, meaning that Russians will feel and will understand that their lives will have significantly deteriorated comparing to 2023. 2023-2024 are election years for the Russian Federation. In autumn, several regions will already see elections, and in 2024 there will be presidential elections. The umbrella brand for the whole election process is unity in the people's war, and now they promote the idea, the concepts of unity as the most important thing that our country has, because the war was provoked by the West, which wants for Russia to collapse. And there can be there are 3 areas and 3 topics for the process in Russia, and they started controlling these aspects. The first one, controlled fight against corruption, because now this problem has been emerging in sociology. That's why they will control corruption activities. They will disclose corruption scandals and will demonstrate how law enforcement bodies fight with this. The next topic, introduction of soldiers' mothers to the electoral lists of all political parties that will be allowed to take seats in local authorities and in the Russian parliament. So these organizations of soldiers' mothers will be controlled. And the third aspect, in most regions of the Russian Federation over last decades, there were mass environmental rallies in a number of regions and cities. That's why now the state pays special attention to environmental movements and rallies. The leadership wants to become in charge of these movements, and that's why they would like to have the representatives of these movements in the local bodies. And there is one more aspect, the People's War, which is the key brand. So for them, this is the People's War. the population does not accept this brand. There are several reasons, but the main reason is that the people's war means that you need to go to the military commissariat. People don't want to join the army, and there are some different questions to patriots, but and they say that they don't want to join the army because there is the chaos in the Russian army. And people also say that they are ready to join army only when their enemy will be on the threshold of their homes. So this is the reasons why they don't want to join army and don't want to go fighting. One more important issue: Russians' attitude to their army. There is no empathy in the Russian society. So they don't feel empathetic with Bucha, Mariupol, killed children, tortured lives, etc. But paradoxically, they don't feel any empathy towards their own army. And here there is quite an interesting fact. Namely, Russians believe that people in a uniform are the people who have concluded contract with the death. This is the formula of their attitude to their own army. So we would like to discuss here in Ukraine how many Russians should be killed for Russians to go on the protests. We cannot define the number. There are some roles in different regions, and they will continue in the future. For example, in Donbass, the Tatarstan battalion has almost fully killed. So around 30 people were killed and around 100 people were injured, and there were some protests in the Russian Federation. And of course, that such thing will accumulate. But as of today, Russians believe that people who wear uniform have signed or concluded contract with their death. That's why they feel detached with their army. To understand the situation in Russia, we should also speak about Putin's psychology. Putin has a sociopathy. Psycho is Lukashenko. And as for sociopathy, this defines two states: pain and fear. So sociopaths, they are cowards. And we like to speak about the story about Putin, who saw a rat that was brought to the corner. And actually, quite often Putin is compared to such cornered rat. And so that's why people are afraid that he can press the red button to start nuclear attack. But the situation is quite contrary. We can observe his behavior over the last 22 years, and there is only one thing that we can see, that in such situations he tries to hide and to wait. And for him, this strategy is the best. It is similar to the situation, for example, with Assad and Maduro. So in critical moments, he believes that he should wait, and then to wait when they can move forward. And of course, we understand that worked for Syria and Venezuela. And Putin takes this example, and he believes that he can hide, that he can stand in a corner and just wait for the window of opportunities. This is his main strategy after he loses the offensive that they have announced as a big offensive in Donbas. After that, he will try to hide in a corner and wait for the window of opportunities. There will be no nuclear missiles here. Goals of the war. It is very important to understand that we're trying to find goals in the situation when there are no goals. So there are no goals at the moment, except for having some successes in Donbas. New objectives will appear during the war campaign. So as of today, we can't say that Putin has any specific goals of occupying Kyiv, Odesa, Poland. No, there is a minimum goal to capture the entire Donbas. If he succeeds, he will move on. If none, he will just hide and wait for the next opportunity. And this is very important that this person does not have any empathy. He has narcissism, and there is the complete lack of empathy for people. The exception is sentimentality for a very limited circle of people. And his famous phrase about the Kursk submarine that it just was drawn is very characteristic of his attitude. And now let's get to Odesa myths. And unfortunately, and in reality, these are only myths. The first thing is that at the beginning of the full-scale war, many said that Odesa will not repeat the fate of Kharkiv, not thanks to the defense of Mykolaiv and Kherson, but because of Putin's obsession that Odesa is the city of Pushkin and Putin loves Odesa. But this is not true. Putin doesn't care about any city except perhaps for St. Petersburg. And the Crimean Bridge, perhaps he also has some sentiments to that. It's like a sacred cow for him. But if it is needed, if he wants to, he will destroy everything to achieve his goal. But he will have goals only when he'll have some opportunities. If there are no opportunities, there are no goals. The next myth is that Odessans will be able to agree upon certain conditions. Actually, this myth resembles the recruitment to the Wagner Group. And how it used to be before yesterday, when Prigozhin said that he decided to stop the process. So they went, for example, to prison. There were 50 people who said they were ready to sign the contract. These people were sent to special premises. They were giving alcohol, they were giving meat. And after that, 100 more persons also announced that they want to be recruited to the Wagner Group. And those prisoners believed that they managed to survive in prison, and they will be able to survive in the army. That's why these Odessans believe that they will be able to agree with Putin is the same as with the Wagner Group. The next myth. Kyiv is not a decree for us, and actually that was the problem of Donetsk, of Donbas, and unfortunately this myth doesn't work here as well. Fears of mobilization, and this fear is all over. The country Odesa is not unique here, but in Odesa, the situation, unfortunately, is also fueled by the military commissars who travel around the city in ambulances and hand out notices. The next myth, the armed forces of Ukraine are to blame for everything. This is one of the most popular myths of the war. And Russians always try to blame someone else for their deeds. And one of the key myths of the Russian world is that they have never started the war, that they always defend themselves. The next myth, Putin's attitude towards Odessa. I've already covered this partially because Putin does not have any sentiments towards Odessa. Odessa is not a sacred place for him. But we need also to understand that there is one main difference between the current leadership of the Russian Federation, including Putin, and the late Soviet leadership, including Khrushchev and Brezhnev. Khrushchev and Brezhnev had the war experience. Khrushchev was in Stalingrad. Brezhnev also served in the army, but they saw the war with their own eyes. And around them, there were millions of people who suffered the war and occupation. And the main ideology of the late Soviet Union was to fight for the peace. And people accepted this because they understood back then that peace was important. The Russian leadership now does not know what the war is because they have not even been, they were not even in Afghanistan. And for them, the war is a kind of reconstruction. It is like a television, so it's kind of a simulacrum of the war. So for them, this is something shown on the TV. So this is a TV story of war and story of peace. And they showed this in Syria. And everything they have been doing here now is an attempt to reconstruct something they are not aware of. And for them, destruction of any number of people or citizens does not mean anything if this gives them the elusive victory. This is briefly what I can tell you about Odessa myths in the Russia-Ukraine war in 2022, 2023, and now I'm ready to answer your questions. I have a question. It will be not only about Odessa or the current situation. In Russia, it was popular to say that the main liberal person is Putin, and that any other person that could be after Putin would only make it worse. But how do you think if there will be some more radical person instead of Putin, like Prigozhin, Kadyrov, or some other people? Will it increase the risk of using nuclear weapons or attack of other states? To answer the question, I should start with the fact that I don't like to make some comparison with the history. But after Stalin, Beria was supposed to be the head of the Soviet Union. And actually, he started telling that they need to reconcile with the West. That's why when we say now about a radical person, the person can change in power. And we believe that there will be only two possible things, the reconciliation or to make the situation even worse. But I believe that the first option is more probable because we can actually see that elites are tired. Secondly, after 2 days ago in The Hague, the defector directly blamed Putin that he made an order to bring book to the territory of Ukraine that Dawn MH17, and there were the records of Putin's conversation with Pasechnikov. We can say that the process has started to politically isolate Putin. And in the collective West, there is now the consensus emerging, the new one, because before that they were afraid of a more radical person after Putin. But now they understand that this is almost impossible to stop the process without physical or political removal of Putin. After that, they will have the window of opportunities. I always supported this theory. I have always said that removal of Putin will be the first step to solve all the issues. Thank you. Are there any questions here? Yes. I have a question about your last statement that the changes in Russia are possible only after Putin's death, because he can live for 10 more years. And should you wait for his death, or should we build our strategy basing on the current situation? Because if Putin manages to come back to the borderlines before the 24th of February 2022 is not acceptable for us, because then we will have the Transnistrian scenario. So we should find for the opportunity to solve the issue from the inside. You know, I have not said that we should wait for his death. On the contrary, I've mentioned that the changes are possible only after physical or political removal of Putin. All we have to do now is just to fight. So as for destroying Russia from inside, this is not the question directly to me, because I'm not responsible for the process. But actually, I've published a book about this, and I wrote a book, and in 2 months it will be published. So the name of the book is How to Destroy the Russian World. The next question from Suspilno. Despite the fact that there are still certain myths about Odesa as the sacred place for Russians, have the Russians changed their plans towards our city and our region? Do they still expect that they will be able to capture the city? I've said that goals are constantly change, the operative goals. Do they want to capture Odesa? They want to conquer the whole world. And there is no precise definition of the Russian world, but I like the definition of Prokhanov, which is one of the ideologists of the Russian world, who once said that the Russian world is everything, including stars in the sky, grass around their houses, etc. Will they try to conquer Odessa if they have such an opportunity? I'm sure that they will try, but at the moment they don't have such an opportunity, and at the moment they can continue fighting only near Luhansk and Donetsk oblasts. A journalist has sent me a question which is very important for Odesa and for the part of Ukraine which has border with the Russian Federation. The question is there is any sense in attempting to persuade the relatives living in Russia or relatives supporting Russia? Actually, there is no more such. We don't have such opportunity anymore. We had such opportunity in the past. We can start talking to them as soon as they feel that their life is deteriorating. So this is the question of refrigerator, the question of food. And as soon as they understand that the war means deterioration of their lives, that the direction of their development is wrong, only after that we can talk to them. So we need to understand what happens in their heads. I've already mentioned double thinking. And before the first wave of mobilization, sociology showed that only 13% of their population support mobilization. 2 weeks after the first wave of mobilization started, that number increased to 54% of people supporting the mobilization. What happened with them? And this is similar to the tale when a dragon comes to a city or to a town saying that the town should give that dragon their 15 or 20 young men or women. So the population of the town starts crying, but then they give these 20 young men or young women to dragon, but after that they start celebrating. For them, mobilization is now their plan B. And now they're still in the myth believing that everything what is happening now is their plan B. But after they fail in Donbass, they will understand that there is no plan B. And after they realize this, theoretically, and I say theoretically because the propaganda is very powerful in their country, but after that we can theoretically start discussing with them at least some topics. And the last question, please. Dolmatov, RFI. I have a question about Odesa and Odesa myth, that Odesa is a Russian city, and that myth was long before the war. And now, of course, it has become marginal and people don't support it. And that myth was also popular not only in Ukraine but all over the world. Should we create a new myth for Odesa? Should we appeal to the Ukrainian past or to the Ukrainian future? Thank you very much for your question. You see, it can take hours to discuss the topic, but the whole problem of Ukraine after the war, and it is not a problem but a situation that can make us stronger, is that we should reinvent Ukraine. We should reinvent Ukraine in a range of aspects. But one of the aspects is regional. We should reconstruct Chernihiv. And we can see that 1/3 of their population has not returned. We should reinvent Lutsk because the population has increased there by 30–40%. We need to reinvent the whole range of regions, including Odesa. Should we appeal to the past or to the future? I think we should appeal to both. In the Institute of Future, we have started every cycle of discussions named to win the war and not to lose the reconstruction. And here we speak about social agreement. Any social agreement should start with understanding our future, what we are proud of, and of understanding our enemy and our trust with the state. When it comes to the new Odesa myth, then this is a kind of a social agreement on the regional level. So this is future, freedom, enemy, and other issues. Thank you. Thank you very much for the briefing. Journalists will have opportunity to talk to Vadym after the briefing. With this briefing, we will finalize our working week, but stay tuned. It might be interesting for you.